Welcome to the Latin America Regional Advisory Committee's Technical Webinar Series, My Path to a Career in Geophysics. The ACG Latin America Regional Advisory Committee and myself, Lori Whitesell, will serve as your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, the model for this webinar will be a short presentation followed by a question and answer session. During the question and answer session, if you'd like to ask questions, please place your questions in the question and answer box, or you may raise your hand in the webinar interface and I will adjust your settings to allow you to ask questions directly to the presenter. Today's presenter is Dr. ACRamirez, who is Chief Geophysicist for TGS in Norway. Without further ado, Adriana, welcome.
Thank you, Lori. I'm very happy to be here today. Yes, so I will start with a brief history of myself and then follow with a little bit of a brief history of oil all the way till I was born, because there was a lot of things that happened before I came in, and that has, of course, influenced a lot my opportunities and choices. So without further ado, I will start with this photo. This photo is my father and my grandfather. And the reason I'm showing this photo here is because I come from a middle-class family, but my father actually and my grandfather come from pretty much nothing. My grandfather had to rent land to be able to live or earn a living eventually. And he came from a community where there was no water. They had to go for water every week to to be able to survive throughout the week, etc. But one of the things that he believed in was education, and that has had a very big impact on me. One of the stories that I hear from the town where my father was living when he was a child is that in the town there was only one school and one teacher, and that same teacher gave pretty much grade school 1 to 4th and in the same class. And that was the education that was available in that town. The idea, or it was an old-fashioned idea, but in that town, families had a lot of kids with the idea that they will work in the farm, they will help producing the land, and they will be able to have something to eat. My grandfather, for whatever reason, did not believe in that model. And because the model also implied that you would select one of your kids and allow that person to go to university, so that at least one person in your family will have the opportunity to grow and to be a professional. But my grandfather decided that he would give the same opportunity to all his kids. And that's where the revolution in Mexico and the part of the Constitution of Mexico that is quite socialist came into place. My father didn't have any money to study, but there were places where he could study, where he could actually go into a full, how do you say? He would have a place to live, food provided by school, and education. And he started doing that pretty much since he was around 6 years old. And he's been one of the oldest persons in his family, had to open the path for other people. So my life started much easier. My father is a dentist, an orthodontist, and I started with a fantastic, fabulous life. I was allowed to go to private schools, and the idea of education is the most important, most valuable thing that they can offer to you. Your parents kept in the head of my dad and somehow continue with me. So, and this is my family. We're 5 persons. I'm the middle the middle one. And this is a photo from when I graduated from high school. So anyway, let me continue. I grew up in Mexico City. My parents are from Guanajuato. I studied all the way to high school in Mexico City. Then I moved to Monterrey in the north of Mexico. This is around 1,000 kilometers to study my engineering in physics. And then from there, I moved another 1,000 kilometers to study in Houston, my master's and my PhD in physics. So Mexico City. Mexico City is at an elevation of 2,250 meters in average above the ocean. I grew up, this is what the delineation of Mexico City. I actually was born in Mexico City, but I grew up over here in Coacalco. And I studied over here my grade school, where one of the big things is that Mexico is next to the United States, so English is very important. And it is part of the education that is free in the country. But of course, one of the main reasons why my parents wanted me to go to a private school that they could afford was because English in private schools was at a much higher level. So when I was a kid, I would take in grade school 2.5 hours of English every day without a word in Spanish. And actually, I learned to speak English before I learned to write it when I was in first grade in school. So even though I have an accent, my professors were all Mexicans and my English is not absolutely perfect. I think it was a huge advantage in my life to have that opportunity. Just because we are in a geo community, besides the fact that Mexico City is at 2,250 meters above the ocean, more or less, there's two very beautiful peaks that you can see from the capital. And one is the Iztaccíhuatl volcanoes, and the other one is the volcano of Popocatépetl. And these are their heights. So I will actually, at the end, I will come back to this. But in the meantime, let's continue. This is my city. I love Mexico City, and you can't blame me for being patriotic and being in love with my own culture, but that's who I am. I actually love all cultures, especially since I was a kid. It was the Greeks and the Egyptians that I liked the most, but the Mayas were absolutely my favorite, and then the Aztecs, which are the ones who were in the capital. So some of the traditions are still alive, as you can see in the photo in the center. I took all these photos are in the city center in the capital. Mexico City is called the city of palaces because it's the city with more palaces per square meter in the world, in the capital, in the old town. And it's also it's old and modern in a sense. Well, it's not modern anymore, but this is the Latin American Tower, which was at some moment the highest tower in the world. And you can see how it mixes with different architecture. This is the Palace of Beauty Arts. I love that place. This is just a view from Chapultepec, where there is a castle where some of our presidents and also some of our presidents have lived there. And also when we were part of France, Maximilian from Habsburg lived there. And this is a foggy day, but you can see that it's a little bit high up. And an interesting thing is that this was a small island. Mexico City is built on top of a lake. So that's one of the reasons why the resonance in earthquakes is so bad, because it's not a very consolidated ground. It's pretty much a lake. And here I'm showing a view of the cathedral, Metropolitan Cathedral in the city of Mexico, in the capital. And that one it has an interesting story because it took 300 years to be built. And the reason was that they used the stones and the material from the pyramids that are actually underneath the capital. They buried them, but they also destroyed some parts of them and they used them. And the people who were building them were the Aztecs in reality. And they didn't want it to finish. So they actually tried to work in the day and find ways of destroying or not allowing this to continue. So it took 300 years, but there were also floods and there's a lot of stories. And in one of the floods, it was possible to uncover some of the city that is underneath. So this is, well, stories after stories, but that's the capital, that's where I grew up. And now I'm gonna change gears a little bit. I will talk about oil because that's part of why we're here, geophysics. And I will take you all the way to pretty much where I was born. It's going to be very fast because it's just a way of seeing what had happened. And I will start with the world. So in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, the price of oil started going up because of kerosene, pretty much. It was a way of eliminating housing. Then there's a lot of price fluctuations because that's when the drilling starts becoming, in the United States, a very high activity, and also, well, also in other parts of the world. But it's a lot of fluctuations because there is no full control, and we're seeing a little bit of that oversupply. Prices go down. At some moment it was even negative, and then they started controlling. And then it was another hike, etc. So then there's an epidemic in cholera, and that's how you see this spike here. The Antitrust Act that removes all the, makes Standard Oil split up in several companies. And this is the first patent that ever was produced by Fessenden, and the first patent in seismic exploration. So it is the same idea as Mintrops for refraction seismograph, but it was independently developed. Onshore seismic as a commercial activity starts in this period of time, and then there's the first refraction commercial discovery in 1924. Then the large-scale onshore surveying continues. And then over here, in 1944, is the first offshore experiment. And quite interesting to me is that it is geophones planted on the seabed that were used. So in a sense, you could say that this is the first OBN that ever existed. Of course, there was no multi-component, but it's quite interesting because this is something I'm working with these days. Streamer seismic starts in this period over here. And the floating streamer was used. It was just a single streamer, a single vessel, and a second vessel as a dynamite source. Computers come here, and that's where the digitalization comes in. So if you happen to attend one of the talks that Sven Treitel or Anders Robinson have given about their history, this is where they invented, digital recording. Or, well, before recording, they invented digitalization in this time by literally measuring traces that were analogically recorded. I work right now in Norway, so it's interesting for me to map when the North Sea opened up for business and when air guns came, and they're still being used. Then there's the Arab States embargo after the Yom Kippur War. So that comes with this race in oil. And you can see also there are other wars here. I did not place all of them. The first 3D Marine, that's in 1974, even though it was a single vessel with a single streamer, so it was several passes, but quite interesting how things develop. And then there's the Iran Revolution, and this is pretty much when I'm born in 1978. So a lot had happened already. And there's a lot of science, there's computers, there is a lot of knowledge. Well, in Mexico, first concession started in 64 to 67. That was by Maximilian from Habsburg when we were part of France, small period. And then back has been Mexico independent. The first wells were drilled around 1969. There was a discovery in this time. It's a small discovery. I don't remember the name, but I can remember later on and find it if anybody's curious. And then, but what starts fueling the activity in Mexico is the development of the railway in the 80s and 90s. The first big discovery that actually eventually finds a lot of discoveries that are now called the complex of Faja de Oro starts in 1901, and it's finished, or well, discovery of that area is in 1915. So, and this is in 1901, Porfirio Diaz makes the oil law in Mexico. So in Mexico, it has been big. It has been a long story, and it has had a lot of activity. Then we have the Mexican Revolution. Well, everybody was in the World War I. We were in a revolution. And after the revolution, Pemex, or originally was Petromex, starts in 1933. Because a lot of what Porfirio Diaz did is he gave a lot of benefits to foreign companies. that law was actually a very capitalist type of law. So then we get into the 30s, and Lázaro Cárdenas, another president who is probably the most socialist president we had, he changes some of these laws, creates a law for expropriation of the petroleum, and in 1938 the oil is expropriated. And actually it's interesting because it was legally done, and Roosevelt in this time, he actually acknowledged that it was legal, and the negotiations were between at least Roosevelt and Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas, were for deciding how much the indemnization was going to be. But the boom in petroleum actually comes here when the Cantarell complex is discovered, starting 1961 to 1971. It's called Cantarell because that's the last name of a fisherman who, in the Gulf of Mexico, close to Campeche, he was fishing, and he continuously saw oil in certain area, and then he reported that to Pemex. And that actually took 10 years for the exploration the whole exploration process to happen, from the decision to start, from the moment it was reported in 61 to deciding, etc., and finding Cantarell and finding the whole complex. It took around 10 years. But Cantarell is an amazing field. It's very compact, and it was a giant. In that moment, it was the largest oil field in the world. Nowadays, it's the second one. And that it was good and was bad for the country, because it was good. It's of course it's good to have a good discovery. Oil could still change things, but it was also perhaps bad because the money that Pemex started producing or was producing actually was milked all the time over the years. At this time it was still good, but as years passed by, there was less and less reinvestment in the company. So it took some years for after the expropriation of oil, it was big growth in the economy. And then here is a very nice peak in the economy of Mexico and the wealth of Mexico. And it continues, but then it starts declining because of lack of investment. And that's something that is changing nowadays. But in this time, actually, two of my uncles went to work in Pemex. And it was a very fashionable thing if you studied engineering and petroleum, etc. But when I was born, which is 1978, as I said, it's actually when Cantarell starts production. And when I was a teenager, the reputation of the oil business was not so good. There were a lot of, it was good and it was not good. It was very complex. There were a lot of discussions about the lack of reinvestment. There was a lot of discussions about the management, poor management of the company. And it was a lot of discrepancies between people really doing hard work and some of the politics around a national oil company. And I don't know if that had any influence in my life at that stage, because I never ever thought about working in oil. And that's where my story starts. So now I'll go back to how I actually became interested in oil. But I started in, I will go back slightly, just I studied in Tec de Monterrey in a private school that belongs to a private university. That's the best private system in Latin America, in 1994 to 1997. I have always been interested in math and physics. I have always been interested in history, in literature, in so many things. So deciding what to study was really, really tough for me. And okay, I put here the scholarship because the system was quite interesting. It was an expensive university. I was fortunate to have a 45% scholarship, but the university trained you well, this is the high school part. They trained you in a very special way. I mean, you had oral communication classes, creativity classes, leadership classes, entrepreneur, all kinds of things besides math, physics, philosophy. And having a scholarship meant that you had to work. So the university, the school paid 45% gave me a reduction of 45% of the fees. But I had to work for teachers. I had to work for different departments, and you had to go to interviews, and somebody has to want to work with you. So usually you graded homeworks or help with things that the professors wanted. But I also worked in a team that was called Eagles, where it was all about leadership and creativity and trying to empower you to think differently and to do things differently. So that was fun. That was exciting. And it's Mexico City. This is actually, well, it's Mexico State, but it's in the metropolitan area. This is not my generation, but my generation of high school looks like that. We were 600 persons graduating. Growing up in this city has no comparison at all to growing up in any other place that is smaller. And for me, that has always been very exciting. That has always been fun. But I think it has also shaped me somehow, because it forces you to, if you want to be noticed, you have to try harder. Competition is high. And I have never really been competing with anyone else except for me. But like, I compete with myself. That has been my life. But it's clear that you have a lot of statistics around you, much more than if you are 30 persons graduating at the same generation. Also, every class, you had classes with different persons, so you had to interact with different people and get to know them and create a network. And it was very common in the school that you had to give presentations and do group things, etc. So you had to find a way of knowing people and identify who you can work with very fast, very efficiently, because in the next class is going to be a different set of these 600 persons. So I think those are skills that somehow growing in this strange place in terms of the amount of people has given me. Oh, there. Yes. So when I was finishing high school, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study. And in that time, one of the classes that had more impact was physics. I always thought math was easy. I actually liked chemistry more than math. But then when I studied physics in high school, I started seeing how that subject, math, that was so simple for me in that time, was allowed me to explain the world, to explain how a rocket went up and down and how the wind would affect it and all these things. And I found it absolutely fascinating. So by the end of high school, I was in between going to literature or journalism or physics. So those were the two parts that of me that were fighting. And it has been a lifelong fight. Physics fascinated me. It was a way of explaining the world, and the more you try to understand it, the less explanations you had. So, for example, I remember I read Stephen Hawking's book, Brief History of Time, in that time, and it has a lot of answers, but it also has a lot of questions. And he writes a second book after that to say that he was wrong in the way he thought in the first book, because he didn't understand quantum mechanics yet when he wrote the first one. And when you hit quantum mechanics, not that I really understood it in that time, but when you start touching that, you realize it becomes almost like a philosophy. You don't have a deterministic answer. You just have probabilities of an answer. And that goes for me, that's where literature and arts join physics, because it becomes something where you don't really have a clear answer. It's creative. So anyway, and in trying to decide what to do in my last year at high school, my last semester at high school, I went to the University of the Cloister of Sor Juana, which is this very fascinating old building from 1500s with these walls that are like 1 meter thick, which was a huge contrast to this university. It was quite modern. This building was quite modern. We had internet when that started and emails and things like that. But anyway, I studied creative writing here. And one thing that did catch my attention is that I was accepted to attend this course It was an 8-month certificate, like a diploma. And I was the only one in high school. The rest of the people were journalists, writers, people who actually lived out of writing something and who wanted to study the basics. And to me, that also that motivated me a little bit to explore physics, because I realized I might be able to be a writer without formally studying writing or journalism, but I probably don't really have the brains to be a physicist without studying physics or math. I will not know what's the next mathematics book that I have to read to understand this other physics. So I didn't think I was smart enough to do it by myself. So that's how I went from Mexico City to Monterrey. I went there to study physics, industrial physics engineering. That was the main campus of the same system, the same university, but it was the only campus that offered physics. And when I joined in 1998, we were 3-4 girls out of 30 students, young students. By 4th semester, we were only 15 left of that group of 30, and only 2 women. And by the time I graduated, we literally graduated from different people, different generations. But from my generation would be the ones that graduated together were probably around 12 persons, 2 women. So I'm 50% of my female colleagues in university. So I skipped 1 year, well, 1 semester here, because the first semester I did study communication sciences in Mexico State. But I had good grades, which was kind of fortunate, because I talked with the professor, the career advisor, and I said I would probably not study communications, but because I really want to study physics, but I really want to learn some subjects. So he allowed me to select subjects that I liked. So that's how I took some early on subjects in journalism, in writing, in other type of skills that further later in my life actually had been helpful, I think. And my scholarship became 50% scholarship, 50% loan, but I still had to work. And in physics, I was allowed to work in the lab, to give a lab. So that was much more fun in the sense, because it was directly related to what I was studying. And in 2000, there was one spot for what was called the Modern Physics Lab instructor. There was only, for all the other physics, basic physics, anyone, one, but there were perhaps 10 positions. But for the Modern Physics Lab, there was only one. And it was held pretty much from the moment you got it till the moment you graduated, unless something happened. And in 2000, the person who was giving that lab graduated, so it was given to me. This is called modern physics, but it was pretty much optics, like reflections and refractions. And that's where connections to geophysics starts coming in, but I didn't know then. So what I'm showing here is a laser experiment. So this is a laser. And there's going to be a pinhole to create a very, very small wave. And then you have lenses to create plane waves. And you put objects where you can create diffractions like this. And nice diffraction patterns. So my starts, or the way I started with reflection and refraction and Snell's law and all these curvatures, spherical waves, plane waves, etc. I was here, and it was in the lab actually. I did the questions as well, but I was teaching this lab, and that was super fun. And it also allowed me to learn a lot about photography, particular black and white photography. And in the last year, with another 2 colleagues of mine, Roberto Trigueros and Aline Gomez Maqueo, the 3 of us used the lab and created different objects to create diffraction patterns that were symmetric or interesting. And we won a 3rd place on a modern art black and white photography competition. So yeah, we did it with physics and Fourier transforms. That was fun. And then in the summer of 2000, I went to study as part of my engineering. I went to INAOE, which is an institute where only masters and PhDs degrees are offered in Mexico. It's from the national system, and it's an institute for astrophysics, optics, and electronics. And I did nonlinear optics and astrophysics in that summer over there. This is a photo of the telescope. So there it was fascinating, and one of the professors there thought I was good, and I was quite lucky that people noticed me. I really never really understood exactly why, because other students were as good as I was, perhaps. And in that time, what I was probably better than some of them, and it's because I was one semester ahead of most of the students that were with me in that summer. It was Fourier transforms, and perhaps also my part in the lab. But anyway, he offered me to stay 1 more month and to do a little bit of research with him. And then he contacted me with a person in Barcelona, in the University of Barcelona, who offered me to do my postgraduate studies there. So that was a path that I considered in that time. But I didn't follow it. I liked optics, don't get me wrong, I really liked them. But somehow it was not yet my passion. So it was something that, yeah, I could do, but I felt a little bit lost in that time in my life. And then I came back to Monterrey after the summer. That's the black and white photography in the Modern Art Museum that I said. And this slide is, should I come back to the next one? But anyway, I'll go back to optics in a second. This is just a parenthesis. As I have said, throughout my education, my fight was between mainly literature, arts, but mainly literature and physics. So one of the ways I solved it in university was to ask permission to get to take extra credits on Spanish literature. And my career advisor actually allowed that. He never understood why I wanted to take a class that was called stylistics, because he always thought it sounded like styling your hair or something like that, but it was about style in writing. And he never really understood that. He used to make fun of, in a good way, of what I was doing with literature. He thought I was just entertaining myself in a silly way. But I loved it. So it was fun for me to do that. And I also started doing oil painting as an extracurricular thing and creative writing. And the reason I'm putting these things here is because for me, I think passion is very important, but also passions that are different and where I can use one to disconnect from others. And for me, both writing and painting has been it's like this self-isolation space, which right now is more popular thanks to coronavirus. But that's is better than meditation or than trying to distress in a different way. That's how I distress. I paint or I write. And in that time, I didn't know whether I really had it or not, but I took classes and I got opportunities in painting. My professor invited me to join him in an exhibition. So I had my first exhibition with 3 paintings, but it was pretty much his. So creative writing, I was also invited to read a couple of times. So in a sense, this fueled this other part and allowed me to continue a little bit with physics somehow. These are 2 of the paintings that I did in that time. Anyway, back to physics. So modern physics lab, that's pretty much optics in the lab. This summer in the INAOE that I mentioned. And then in 2000, I got a new opportunity. My career advisor, Hugo Alarcón, actually, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he hired me as a research assistant. But in that time, in this university, there was no graduate studies in physics, and there was no budget for research per se. So what he did is he actually paid me an equivalent salary from what I was earning in modern physics lab to do research with him, for him. And I didn't understand the magnitude of what he did in that moment until years later, because I didn't even know I was that good at research, right? Or I could do research, but somehow he saw something and he did that. And now I remember why. It's because one of the classes we were working with MATLAB, with this analytic part of MATLAB to try to solve equations, differential equations. And he was curious about how to apply that more and more for education, which was his topic. And he found a paper that was using MATLAB to solve a wave equation in a string, a very simple problem. And then he asked me to reproduce it, and I did, but I found an error, and it was a minor error, but it was an accuracy thing. And then that gave me my first paper. So it was an expanded abstract for a American physics conference from the association. It was in the chapter of Texas. I did not get to present my poster because there were there was no budget for me to go, so somebody else presented it. But that was my first, my first poster. And then I also did, as an extra, you had the opportunity to do some specialization. And most of my colleagues did what I call cables and coding and things like that, like robotics and electronics, etc. But I was not a true engineer. I was more of a scientist, I think. So I did biotechnology. That was more fun for me. And I continued doing this and this on the side. So I already mentioned these extracurricular things, but then when I finished, because when I was finishing in these Spanish literature classes, there was an invited speaker from Spain, from Madrid. Ordóñez was his last name. I actually found his name. Javier Ordóñez Rodriguez. And he was, I met him. They introduced me to him because he was a scientist who was writing history of science. And he had a degree, master's degree, that he was offering on history of science. And then he offered me a spot there as well. And I really wanted to study that. I really, really wanted to study that. But by that moment, I had already decided that I wanted to do science as a life and literature as a hobby, or writing as a hobby, or art, whatever it was. But I really wanted to study with him in Madrid. And we talked about it for a while, and the plan was that I would finish my engineering. I was going to take 6 months, and then I was going to go and study with him. And I was planning to do that, but Hugo Alarcón, the professor who hired me as a research assistant, he kept telling me that it was not a good idea, that if I was serious about being a scientist and pursuing a career in physics, I should go for a master's in physics before doing my literature thing, he used to say. And anyway, I did not take a decision. Oh yeah, well, this is just my favorite books. These are poetry books and these are math books in that time. So my problem was there. And these are the opportunities that I had. I just marked them there in that moment. So this is my photo when I graduated, that moment when you go up to the podium as a graduate and go down as an unemployed without knowing exactly what you're gonna do. So that was me. And in my head was the fight between physics and literature. So before I actually decided, I think I actually had decided that I was going to go to study history of science and then go back to physics, in spite of the insistence of my professor, Dr. Hugo Alarcón, of not doing that order, going first to physics in master's, then going to history of science, and then go back to physics. So anyway, these were my options: from here, going to here, and then somehow going back to physics. And I went on a trip with my university, 10 of the persons that graduated with me. We went to Europe for the first time. Europe looked very, very, very far away. This is me just standing next to the Louvre. And when I was in Europe, when I was traveling, this professor sent me an email. It was not calling, it was emails. And then he said that he really, really believed it was a mistake for me to go to study history of science. So to make the story short, he was going to send an application on my behalf to the University of Houston. He was going to find the references, he was going to fill in the application, and all I had to do was to take the GRE and the TOEFL and enter the program, and then do a 1-year master's degree, and then go to Spain to do whatever I wanted to do. But at least he said that that was the only way he believed I was going to go back to physics. So he was so determined that I said, okay, apply. I guess somehow I was lucky and spoiled because it came like that, and then he did. And the next thing is that this is him actually. So the next thing is that I went to the University of Houston to study a master's in physics. It's funny because in that time, what I really wanted to do was history of science and writing, and feel that I was able to achieve that part of my life before going to understand what I really wanted to do in physics, because I love physics, but I was not exactly knowing exactly where my passion was. My colleagues, they knew it, or I think they made me believe they knew it. So one went to study microbiology to Penn State, another one went to study astrophysics, Rutgers, etc. They went to solid state physics. I mean, they knew what they wanted, and I loved everything, but I was not fascinated, passionate about anything. So I went to the University of Houston, and part of the application was that you needed, well, I didn't want my parents to pay for me, so I needed to have a job and a scholarship somehow. So I actually, once I was accepted, I applied for all these, and one professor accepted me, Dr. Gunnar Atner. He was doing statistical physics and neural networks. Now it should have come handy if I had stayed longer with him. But anyway, I want to do that because, as I said, I really didn't know what I wanted. So that's the University of Houston. 2001 to 2004, I did my master's in physics. I did another paper there. My second conference abstract was, again, American. It was the Association of Physics, the American one, the Canadian one, and the Mexican one, doing a first ever joint conference. And that was in Mérida in Mexico. And that was, they were having grants for students. So I was able to go on there and present. And I presented a little bit of work that I did with other colleagues. And that I mean, it was a small contribution from my side. It was neural networks applied to, we were trying to understand osteoporosis in the bone, to model it, and to model how, I mean, different stress and different, it's like rock physics. Strength is going to break the connections and make fractures. And the way we were modeling that was with neural networks. So that was that. And then again, I was ready to go to Madrid. So I had again called the same professor and I said, I'm going there this time, this for sure, etc. And yeah, that was supposed to be the idea. But there was one thing that had really caught my attention years before. When I was about to graduate, Schlumberger used to go to Tec de Monterrey in Mexico and hire people as field engineers. And for whatever reason, they liked in industrial physics engineers. And I think it's because we were very broad. We were not very particular about anything, because it's not an absolutely strict engineering in the engineering sense. I mean, it depends how you specialize and all these things. And I remember I was never interested in being a field engineer, but they gave a presentation that I attended. And in that presentation, they had like 5 seconds saying, we also do research. And in that part, they were showing how from the surface, well, it was an animation, but the point was that from the surface, from measurements in the surface, in reflections and refractions, they were able to see the drill bit and to steer the drill bit and to be able to go and drill horizontal and actually get to the target and follow the target and all that. And that sounded super interesting, I remember. But as I said, in my generation, there was not that boom, and that oil in Mexico didn't have the best reputation anymore as a company, or as a field. It had a good reputation and everything, but it was not like decades before when that was the place where everybody wanted to work. So somehow, even then, I didn't think about geophysics. I didn't even think about petroleum engineering or anything like that. I just thought I want to work in that research thing that sees where the drill bit is going. So anyway, when I was, again, now in Houston, 2004, I'm trying to decide to go, I'm ready to go to Madrid. I bumped into Arthur Webline, this fabulous professor. And he has a consortium. His consortium, Mission-Oriented Seismic Research Program, has 23 sponsors from the oil companies in that time. Oil companies, research institutes worldwide are sponsoring this one person who is actually a physicist and who had a PhD in physics, very famous professor. He was student of very famous professors in physics, a great background, and went to the industry for 30 years. And he introduced, together with other people from his generation, scattering theory to solve problems, or apply the equations of scattering theory to solve problems in seismic exploration. And I met him and I went to one of his classes, and because of my optics background, all his equations look familiar. Green's functions and Green's theorem and the waves propagate and hit the surface and get reflected and refracted and all that. But he had a purpose. His research was something between fundamental research and a purpose of solving problems, practical problems in that industry that animation made me think I wanted to go to. So when I met him, I realized my dream of going to study history of science and doing for a year some writing was gone. This was my shortcut to what I wanted, and this time was clear. I wanted to work there, and as I said, it was a perfect match because his equations and the way he explained them, the way he explained any concept was just fascinating, because he can explain you the most complex equation you want to imagine, and in a way that is reduced from that complexity, and you can visualize it. You can see the wave propagating. You can see it behaving in this or that way. And in a sense, all that optics and the lab and all that, it made me connect things very easy, because in the lab you can make a Fourier transform and focus the wave right there in front of your eyes, and then do something to it and defocus it and bring it back and then have something else. And this was the same story, but in equations and then coding. So that's how I ended up going to the oil industry. Very long story, I realized, but that's how it went. And then in the time, as I said, he had 23 sponsors, so it was fascinating. We had to give presentations every year to sponsors, so we had an annual meeting. And the sponsors notice you and they start offering you internships. So I did 5 internships in these 2 years. To be honest, I actually did 2 interviews. I did an interview with Shell in end of 2004, and an interview with BP. And actually, it was 2004, end of 2004, when I joined the group. And VP asked me some specific questions about data, and I have no clue. Like, I had never seen seismic data. Well, I had seen a couple in the few classes that I had with art, because I was literally just joining the group that winter of 2004 when I went to this interview. So VP rejected me. But in Shell, I was more lucky because the person who interviewed me was a rock physicist. So when he asked me what I have done, and I talked about the bone and the fractures and the stresses and strength that you put into it, pressure, etc., and how, depending on how you handle that object, whether it's going to create a fracture or not, and how that relates to osteoporosis. So when I explained that, he actually told me that was fascinating because he was a rock physicist, and he started explaining me how rocks behaved in a similar way, what the things that they were looking for. So that's the only reason I got that first internship. So anyway, and these internships are my path, in a sense, to start becoming a geophysicist, because that's where I learned SafeMap, their processing software in Shell. I had to learn it, I had to use it, and I had to understand what DMO was and NMO and all these things. And in that time, remember, a lot of it was just to translate that to optics. And, okay, NMO is this. Like, try to understand it, because it was a completely different lingo to me. But I also met fascinating people. So in Shell, Hing Tang was my mentor, and but thanks to Art Wegline, my professor, and his fabulous networks. And networks super important, and I cannot stress it more than that. Is very, very important for your career. He had a fantastic network, and he was a good. He is, sorry, a very good physicist and geophysicist. So in the annual meetings, we had the sponsors coming to view our presentations, and the sponsors that came from the companies were, sometimes it was the head of research, sometimes it was the vice president of this or that, this famous researcher. All the people whose papers I was reading and being inspired by, they were there. And if you were able to impress them positively in any way and connect with them, you eventually have a fantastic network. So that happened. That happened, and in the internships, of course, it became stronger. So with Hing Tang, I work in Shell first, as I said, and Shell gave a lot of training, which was very interesting for internships, because they even trained us on marketing. They took us to a refinery. They trained us on the chemistry that happens in the refinery, different types of oil, drilling. Where do you place your first well when you have a prospect? How do you find the extent of the field? Very basic stuff that I needed to become a geophysicist. And the more I started learning, the more I started becoming fascinated by this field. It was much more than I had ever expected, and this was how the passion started. Then I had the opportunity to go that same year to Trondheim to work with Statoil, with Kjetil Hogstad. He was my mentor. And after being in Shell, where they train you for everything and they pay attention to you all the time, I go to Statoil, and it's July. And Kjetil comes on the first day, very nice person, absolutely like him. It's one of my favorite persons in the industry. But he comes and he tells me, look, I have this problem that I want a solution for. It was about wave field extrapolation to near offsets. And then he explained me why it mattered, and he wrote some examples of how the data was acquired and this gap in the near offsets, because he knew that I didn't have that part of the background to understand exactly how the experiment was done yet. And then he said, so, I mean, he thought that it could be solved with, I remember it was about Bayesian theory, but he said, but I mean, just try to solve it or find a solution for this problem, right? Work on this. And then he said, I'm going on a holiday for 15 days, see you in 15 days. And I panicked slightly, but then I was not very strong in Bayesian theory. So I actually went back to Green's theorem, which is something that I knew from my time in optics, and that pretty much, as Art Wegline says, you can relate anything in your physics to Green's theorem. Not machine learning or AI stuff necessarily, but anything that has a physics part, you can relate it to Green's theorem. So I went that path, and when he came back, I had something. It was not perfect, but I had something, and that's the first time I did some new research that was applied, was relevant for a company. And then the next year I went to ConocoPhillips to work with Simon Shaw, and that was the only internship that I did that was related to directly to my PhD. That was an inverse scattering series, and in particular that was internal multiples, even though I did also other topics. Then I went back to Statoil that same year, and again with Kjetil Hofte. And this time interferometry was starting to be it was a hot topic. So we worked on it, and we found a way to relate it to understand some of the artifacts that it had, and to solve them by using mostly the direct arrival. And of course, if you had two components, you could solve it with older theories like Weyland, Seacrest, and other theories. And that actually gave me my first paper at the EAGE. So I had some papers before in SCG. And after that, I went to BP and I worked on wavefield deconvolution with Ken Matson and Rodney Johnston. And all these people, all these mentors that I'm mentioning from these companies had made a huge impact in my career. One, because they gave me freedom. Two, they were patient. The first month in each one of these internships, I knew nothing, especially in the first one with Shell, because I didn't really know in that time what processing exactly was or seismic data. What looked, I had just been a few months with after Weyland, and I knew theory, but they let me be confused that month. And then the second month, I started producing something, and it was a good match. I mean, they actually talked to me a lot. They introduced me to a lot of people in the company. They spent time with me, you know, lunch and sometimes having a dinner, etc. And in particular, they also taught me about how they have handled their careers, important steps in their careers, how they communicate when they have an issue, or when they really want to publish something and the company thinks it should not be published, how to go into a balance, perhaps with a patent, or perhaps by finding the part that you can present without giving the part that you can't, but actually where that part is a complete piece of research that you can present and you're comfortable presenting. So, and in particular, Ken Matson gave me one piece of advice that was crucial. He said, if you are serious about working in this industry, you have to read this book. And that book was Daniel Yergin's The Prize, which is an 800-page book with history of oil. And it was the best recommendation I got about not math and physics in that specifically, or processing, or the career per se, how to maneuver it. It was about understanding the history, where all these things come from, and how it has developed, and how it is about oil, it is about energy, but it's also about wars, it's about supplies, it's about having control, it's about entering a new country, it's about negotiation at a completely different level. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And yeah, Arthur Weyland, he taught us much more than physics. He actually, he taught us everything from how to give a presentation. I mean, I actually found some of my old notes, and one of the things that he said, and I remember it was important, especially for me coming from physics, pure physics, used to give presentations with a lot of math, and my first presentations in SCG were mostly math, and I got criticized for that. But he said, I mean, you show math, you explain the physics, and you say, why should anybody in the world care about what you have to say? And that's crucial. But he also always said that we had to tip our hat for the people who came before us. Always say that, give recognition to all the people that have had a contribution. Not all of them, of course, but the main and key persons that came before you, just acknowledge them. It's actually very, very important. It's also about theories. All the theories have a compromise, especially in this industry that is applied physics. And what is important is to compare the degrees of completeness, and also to know when something is needed and where it's not. because we can create fantastic algorithms, fabulous algorithms that do this and that and that, but sometimes they are not needed. And sometimes a simpler algorithm that probably is less expensive is going to do the job, or sometimes it's going to be complementary, and sometimes is one of them is going to fail because the assumptions are not satisfied, etc. But he also spent time with us, teaching us how to apply for a company, how to write a cover letter, basics of being in the industry, like in an industry job. I remember one of his lessons once, or comments after a meeting, was about emails. And he said that, I mean, you're gonna be in the industry, all of you, and then you might receive an email someday that sounds a little bit strange, like it's not really directed to you. And look into who are in the to or CC in that email, and look at the highest position. Very likely the person that is writing that email that sounds a bit strange to you is not writing to you, is writing to that person. So act appropriately. And about being respectful with everyone, being professional. And one thing that was very important, always said, is your integrity and your reputation. You never know who you're going to work next with. You never know all the rounds of the people here. So you just have to keep that clean. People talk and people move. You never know how it's going to be. So enter companies with good terms, exit them in good terms. And one thing that he used to say is, like, you have to do whatever you have to do. I mean, you're allowed to do that to get where you want to go, but never ever lose your integrity or your reputation in the path. So I always try to remember his words. And he's a drummer as well. So these are the books this is the book that Ken suggested me to read. This is a book that actually Simon Shaw, the person from ConocoPhillips, my mentor from ConocoPhillips, who was also a colleague of mine in MOSRP before he went to ConocoPhillips, he actually lent it to me, so I still need to bring it back to him. And after that, I just became super interested in oil related. And these are my favorite books. Then this is not oil, and this is not oil, but this negotiation. But these Oil Kings, Hitler Scientists, The Quest, Price, Oil, Dynasties, Private Empire are among my favorite books. And I have learned so much from them that allow me to understand the magnitude of what we do every day and the magnitude of our impact and why we are, as an industry, so polarized in the media. And also how the history has changed over the years. So very important, I think, to listen to your mentors, but also I have been very fortunate to have these people behind me. And throughout my career, I could reach out to any one of them, and I constantly have done so. And in particular with RAC Webinar, has been career changes, internal moves, situations, etc., that are difficult to handle. He has been a mentor throughout the years. But my way of paying that is to pay forward. So I have always tried to be the best mentor I can be to people that work with me. I'm strict. I want quality, and I want good students when I have students or emerging professionals that come to work with me. I'm very strict, but I also give as much as I can, just in the same way that all these people have given that to me. And I think that's how things should go. So anyway, moving forward, this is 2005. This is still MOSRP. This is my first paper. My co-author is I closed it. No, it's not clear here, but it's RAC Webinar, the first paper. But the reason I put this page here is because this is the first equation that I did, that it was mine. The first time that I had a contribution in an equation, I was able to put together the amplitude factors, or how the amplitude change, predicted amplitudes for internal multiples changes or decays depending on where the downward reflection of the internal multiple occurs, the shallower downward reflection. So yeah, I will not bore you with that, but that was a moment of pride in 2005. I mentioned to you fascinating people that I have chance to meet with Arthur Eglin, colleagues like Yingfeng Sang, Arthur Eglin, people that I read papers from, that I heard stalled migration several times. Bob Stoll is here, and he used to go to our presentations and ask questions sometimes or make a comment, and it was impressive. Tad Ulrich, etc. Well, Sam Kaplan, Simon Shaw, Einar Utnes. One of the things that I have found fascinating in this industry, coming from physics into geophysics, was that the heroes were alive. The people that I was reading the papers, the people I was reading the basic understanding of what I was about to do, or to try to do research on, or apply, or understand, or the tools that I was using. A lot of them were alive, and they are approachable. I mean, you can talk with them. It's not the same as trying to talk with Einstein or Newton. So it's not in the same level, in the same magnitude, but it's a much younger industry. And that to me has always been fascinating since I joined this industry. So anyway, this is when I graduated. This is, again, my family and my professor. And then after I graduated, I went to Schlumberger. I did different things in Schlumberger. I worked in the velocity model building group, even though I ended up working again in multiples, but I also did some full waveform inversion with Dennis Wiig and his team in 2008, when this was early on and there was a rise to do things. I also did some seismic interferometry, etc. So the fun thing about Schlumberger for me, and the place where I started my career, for some people it was a surprise, because I did all these internships with oil companies and I didn't join any of them. I went to Schlumberger, and the real reason was that I felt some of these companies had fantastic opportunities. They were offering this career path in which you can jump from one position to another in the first couple of years, and then you come back, and if you're really good, you will have a fast track. And that's what they were offering me. And some others were more in the research department, but they had to balance it a lot with processing their own data to be able to get some money for the research department, because most of the research was not central anymore. And I wanted to do long-term research still, but in the industry, not in the academia. And I think the main reason was that I felt I could not call myself a scientist, and I wanted to be able to call myself a scientist. If I didn't do more research, if I didn't do something a little bit more at a more less applied, still up with the goal of application, but not as close to application as doing I don't know, experimental processing or that type of work. I wanted to be able to have a full-time job in research. And the words from Dave Nichols, who hired me in Schlumberger, he said what I wanted him to say, or what I wanted to hear in that time. And the oil price was high. It was 2007, so I was spoiled. I had opportunities. Companies were hiring. They were paying well. And the fact that I had other opportunities always give you more opportunities. I mean, that was one of the learnings that I also got, and it's good for other people. Is once that you get an offer, it's much easier for you to get other offers. So if you are finishing your university, don't go for the first offer. It doesn't mean that you cannot go for that one, but try to get another one. Just say, I already have, I'm in conversation with this company, but I would like to see what are the opportunities here. And then you have at least two options to balance them, and to know whether you really want one or the other. You can also use them for negotiation, etc. But for me, it was more about finding that opportunity that really matched what I wanted to. And in that moment, Dave Nichols he was the research director for Western Geco. Schlumberger had just bought the 30% that Baker Hughes owned in that time from Western Geco in 2007. So then it was Schlumberger full 100% owning Western Geco. So that meant that also collaboration research with Schlumberger, Cambridge, for example, and Massachusetts, etc., was open, because it was the same company. And Dave Nichols had been working in Cambridge, and he came with that high position, but he wanted to have his own research group. and he had 6 persons, and among them it was Evren Yarman and Huyen Bui, and myself, and Konstantin Osipov was another person in our team, and Andrei Bakulin later came in. So it was a great team, and we were allowed to work on a little bit more long-term research. But the fascinating part about Schlumberger is the scale of things. First of all, we were sitting in Houston, so people from processing could come anytime to you and say, hey, I heard that you're good at this, or that you are working on this. I have this problem in this project with a client, help me. And then you could forget things and actually help with that and try to solve that problem. And that's, for me, how I ended up working again on internal multiples, even though I was in the velocity model building group, because they had a problem with internal multiples and they needed my help. But then that allowed me to see the scale of things. My code became suddenly a code that was used in tons of locations, millions and billions of traces were processed, and it would fail, and you got reports from here and there, and then you had to solve the next problem, and things came, and it was at a much larger scale that I would have ever seen if I had gone to one of the operators, I think. Well, not all of them, but most of them do not process the majority of their own data, while Schlumberger as a service company was processing a huge amount of data. So the scale of things was impressive. The way researchers worked across the whole world and talked to each other also was fascinating. And I had great colleagues. Pavan is also here. He later on moved and had his own company. And it also allowed me to go and visit the first vessel that I ever visited, and only one, the Western Neptune that I'm showing here. Again, being a physicist, turning to geophysicist, going to that vessel was critical. For the first time, I understood that my point source was not a point. It was something like 20 meters, like all these 3 super rays for the flip-flop and all these little guns. I was just surprised that physics works with geophysics. And the length of things, the strength of, not strength, the length of the streamers, just seeing them from the vessel is amazing, and seeing how they care for the marine life, and getting to see the dolphins and the whales and all that, and see what are the actions, the HSE part. Schlumberger made you take all the HSE very seriously, and we all had to take HSE courses. Even if we were not in the field, we had to take the field HSE courses. And being there makes you understand why it's so important to know how to carry a box and things like that. So that was the time in Schlumberger. And then for different reasons, I moved. Part of it was a personal reason with my ex, because we had a dual career. And one member of his family was getting sick, so it was one of the reasons why we moved to the UK. So this is our last day at Western Geco with our colleagues and saying goodbye. As I said before, always live in good terms, and they will be friends forever, and you will keep being colleagues because you see each other in the conferences, you end up doing co-organizing workshops together, etc. So, and we are, not all of us, but 90% of the people here have moved. And Brian, the person here, is the person in the entrance. That's another thing for emerging professionals. Always say hi to everyone. People are very kind. And also, they might help you. For example, the admin, Miss Hilda in Schlumberger, was the best source of information when a new person came with a big position and you had to give a presentation. I remember I had to give a presentation for Maurice Nassim when he came in, and I didn't know who he was, so I went to talk with Miss Hilda and ask her, I mean, who is this person? What does he care for? Because that way I could fine-tune my presentation to him, so that he will understand why why I was working on what I was working. He came as vice president for a big area that included research, so he needed to be willing to pay my salary. And anyway, that's just a piece of recommendation. I also, in my time at Schlumberger, in 2010, I joined the CG Research Committee, My advisor nominated me in 2009, and they said I was too young. And that was probably too young. But in 2010, Kurt Strack and Chris Cron actually accepted me. And I went to the first meeting, and that was humbling. People were discussing fantastic. They knew what they were talking about. They knew a lot, but also realized that I knew something and I could contribute. So that was fun. And there are good opportunities that are easy for you to access. I mean, join a committee, volunteer for something, etc. And then I got this fabulous opportunity of being the key contact for seismic processing multiples for the SCG in 2010. That was a completely different experience to organize the sessions, invite reviewers, accept, reject papers, etc. It gives you an insight on how your papers are reviewed, your abstracts. And then I moved to the UK, as I said. I went to PGS, and I joined the Geostreamer Research Department, which was fun because it related to some of the things that I did in my thesis, with, in particular, the interferometry part. We Kjetil Hofstad in Statoil ended up going back to Green's theorem and seeing that with two components you were able to do data reconstruction much better than with a single component and without any artifacts like in that interferometry will have in the way it was applied in that time. And you could also extract with these two components the source signature, the ghost, etc. So it was very, very fun to go and work with the streamer data. And also, because of my work with Fullwave Inversion Schlumberger, when I came to PGS, they were starting to, we're working on the implementation of FWI, but more for the processing department to make it more commercial or start to commercialize it. And I was allowed or invited to get involved with that team, and I started to learn more about about the processing part and how the work it is with clients, because that's something I didn't know much from before. So anyway, I'm getting closer to the end. More SCG. This is the first summer research workshop that I co-organized on inversion 2011. Then I went to Statoil, which is Equinor nowadays. I started in Trondheim in the research center. This is probably the most interesting research group I've ever been in. It was a multidisciplinary group. We had EM, gravity, magnetics, rock physics, interpretation. We had mathematicians, we had quantum computing scientists, we had geophysicists, we had geologists, mathematicians already, etc. And we were all working together. And this is the first field trip that I ever went to. When I realized how much fun it is to go hiking mountains and see rocks, I thought maybe I should have studied this in the first place. But as I said before, it never occurred to me to study geophysics. And then I moved to Oslo. And I moved it's like a side move. I went to geophysical operations in the commercial part of the company. So it's still quite technical. I was doing survey design, I was assigned to survey design, but I also got 50% of my time in research. So I had kind of a foot in each place. But I think what I did that was more interesting here was to connect. I knew a lot about processing by then. And in research, I had been leading broadband and all the broadband technology. So it was boom times for broadband, and I had pleasure to interact with pretty much every service company that offered something that was called broadband, qualified technology, multi-sensor streamers, flat slanted streamers, flat curved streamers, all kinds of configurations and deghosting, and come up together with my team and how to QC and get some standards to be able to qualify technology and understand what the quality of different applications. And so when I came to geophysical operations, I think what I would say was one of my main contributions was to connect the three departments, or help further connecting operations with processing and with research. So it was a way of contributing to break silos. And then I asked to join the chief geophysicist team at the end of my career in Equinor. And in that role, I was on charge of, as a stakeholder, or representing the stakeholder part of the company, like the commercial part of the company, as a stakeholder for research, for the portfolio and exploration. So super fun. I think this is the place where I really became a more rounded geophysicist. I started to understand the business side better, not only from the books, but actually from the practice. I mean, how you tender things, how you do procurement, how you how do you decide where you are going to acquire new data or not, reprocess, the value of reprocessing versus the value of acquiring new data, all these things, and the value of research and its lack of value if it doesn't produce something that you can use, right, from a business sense, and depending on the timeline. So it was a place to connect all these different pieces of understanding and to use and leverage my skills. And I got very good people to help me. I have always been fortunate, as I said, to have friends and mentors, etc. And Liltova Sigernäs on the right and Paul Singer in Equinor were crucial in my career. They nowadays I consider my friends, but they have been mentors as well in completely different areas. But everything, mentors and good advocates as well. You also need a sponsor. You also, well, not necessarily need, but it's good to have someone that believes in you, knows your skills, and every now and then, when they are in a much better position, they talk about you, and that gives you opportunities. But as my advisor said, your integrity and your reputation are very important. So you have to work hard. You cannot just expect things to happen to you. So, and I did continue to do some work for SCG. I think I have been doing a lot more collaboration with SCG than any other society, because I started my career in Houston, and that's the conference that I have been attending since 2005, with only one exception 2 years ago. I didn't go. It's the only one. And I have given a presentation in each one of them except for last year. So, and then in 2016, I was asked to be the chair, well, to found the Europe Regional Advisory Committee together with Laurie Weitzel. And I accepted because it was a challenge. And at the beginning, I was a little bit lost, but I had a fantastic team. Besides Laurie was Kurt Strack, who actually is the person who invited me to the research committee, or accepted me at the research committee back in 2010. And Tim Bryce, for example, people with much more experience than I had, because the topics that were being discussed in this regional committee were not necessarily technical, where we were discussing what are the needs in Europe. And at the beginning, I was not ready for that. I was still rather technical. In 2016, I was starting to work more and more, as I said, in the commercial side and to understand more and more. But I think that challenge was very good. And then eventually we started creating webinars, just as you do in the Latin American committee. And we focused on high level professionals and what they have to say of the industry. And there I was able to use my network. Some of the people I had met before, mentioned Maurice Nassim, for example. He came to be the vice president when I was there, and I left Schlumberger, and by then he was, in 2016, he was the 16 already, the president of Western GECO. So people grow in their careers, and if you work hard, if you do, as I said, you keep your reputation, you have good integrity, you work hard, you do what you have to do, and you play well with others, do good networking, mentor other people, be a good colleague even of others in the industry through activities like SCG and workshops, then you keep that network. It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter where you go, it doesn't matter what your position is. So I leveraged that, and together with Laurie and other members of the committee, we have been able to get very good professionals to talk about the industry at a very high level, and that has motivated other people that we then know to contact us to present. So super fun. And finally, I got invited to become a director for the board of directors of SIEM. Sven Treitel is the person and Mariangela Capello, they are the two persons who invited me, and that has been again a new challenge. It's a different way, different role, and I did that from 2018 to 2019, and then I became the vice chair of the board. That's my current role. So everything comes to an end again. So my career at Equinor ended in 2019. Nothing wrong. It was fantastic to work with them. But I got a very good opportunity with TGS, and I came to TGS to become the chief geophysicist back in August last year. And after all this work and all this being passionate and trying to find where I was and how to contribute and working with everyone and all these things, some good things have started to happen. And the first one was I got a recognition for my career trajectory at my first university in Tec de Monterrey, where I studied my engineering physics. So it's 4 persons that got this prize. All of them graduated before I was born. That was humbling, because at some moment I felt like, wow, these people have done so much more and I'm standing next to them. It's humbling, but it's also a nice recognition. And it was for me important, and I didn't know how to get there. One part that was lacking in my career was to make an impact in Mexico, especially for women. I thought, if I could inspire just one of them, but how, right? Because I was doing my career elsewhere. So this opportunity, well, this acknowledgement to my trajectory came, and that was my opportunity. I think I was able to connect to a lot of students and a lot of people. The speech was something that they liked what I said. And then there were some articles written about me, and then I got some people to contact me, and actually students who wanted to have a career. So I think I managed to inspire at least a couple of persons. And yeah, this is my family again. My brother is missing, and these are my 2 godmothers. It's my mother, my father, my sister, and that's me after the award. And then I got, for the first time, I was in some news, in Expert News, after a keynote that I gave and the NCS, where I showed a similar chart of what I showed you, but then I focused on Norway, of what happens in Norway, which is something I didn't show you today. And I had been elected or selected to be the Europe SCG honorary lecturer for next year. So I have to work for that. I need to prepare a presentation, but I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to reach more people and hopefully to inspire someone else the way so many people have inspired me. So just a photo in Mexico City. This is my dad, and this is Sergio Chavez Perez, who used to be the chair of the Latin American Regional Advisory Committee and is now the chair of the Research Committee. One of those persons I have worked with and collaborated with, and more than anything, received so much support, and a Mexican. So it's a fabulous thing. We were in Mexico last 2 December ago. So that was my path, and the last thing that I said I was going to go back to is these 2 volcanoes. This is a photo I took of them when I was flying towards the south of the country. And this is a painting that I did of them, because one of them is supposed to be the lover of the other one. She's supposed to be, Cecil is the white woman, and he's the Smoky Mountain. And there's a legend about them being lovers, but she died when he was in war. So then he placed her on top of a mountain, and gods over the year covered them. And he went to another mountain to just watch her sleep. So that's why they are like this. And then years came, and they were covered with snow, and they became 2 volcanoes. So that's an Aztec story. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much for listening to such a long story, but that was the only way I could tell it.
All right, thank you, Adriana. We have a few questions.
Yeah.
A couple of them were entered early. So the one question says, I've been a seismic interpreter for less than 3 years. However, in order to have a fantastic career progression with the revolving trend, what other skill sets should I integrate into my geoscience to be more relevant?
Skill sets. Well, I guess it depends where you want to work or what kind of work exactly you want to do in the future. But I think it never hurts to expand your horizons. I could have stayed, most of my PhD work was in pre-processing. And the reason I went to model building and then FWI and all these things is because I wanted to, I didn't want to be stuck in one single box. I wanted to be able to understand more and move around. Nowadays, of course, machine learning, digitalization, data analytics, statistics is very relevant. So it's something you can learn as well, and you can apply in so many different areas. It's about the skill sets, but I would say be curious, talk with people, find opportunities, and don't be afraid of making a side move. You will learn a lot, and you will be able to connect your previous skills.
All right, thanks. Another question is, hello, Adriana. What's your advice for young geophysicists still in graduate school, considering the latest developments in the oil and gas industry in relation to price mechanisms and the economy?
That's a hard question, but what I will answer is something that Arthur Wegland said when we visited once, the two of us, my university. Whatever you study it hard, like really study it. Try to understand as much as you can and understand the complexity around it, not focus on a single equation, a single part of your research, for example, if you're in a grad school. Understand what your colleagues are doing, understand everything, but try to really have a deep understanding of the fundamental part of what you're studying, because that you can translate. You can translate to another industry. You can find applications, and you will always be able to explain that properly. So focus on that and be passionate about it, or find something where you're passionate. The downturn will eventually probably end. This is a cyclic industry. This has been one of the worst ever downturns, and it's coming back again. But it will end at some moment, and there will be a gap. There will be need for people. Perhaps not as much people as in the past, but there's always need for people. So focus on your skills and volunteer, perhaps. If you really want to work in this industry, if this is the industry where you want to work, join the society, join a committee, volunteer for a workshop, grow your network and your skill set.
All right, thanks. We have a comment and a question. The comment and question are from a student at Federal University of Technology in Nigeria. I'm studying applied geophysics in my third year now. I'm very passionate about earth science. Thank you for doing this. It's very enlightening. Please, can you tell me the name of the book about oil history that was recommended by you? I think that was the slide that had pictures of some of the books.
Yeah, it's the Prize by Daniel Yergin. Here, it's called Prize with a Z, and the author is Daniel Yergin. He actually he wrote the Commanding Heights, and then the Prize, and then the Quest. For me, the Prize is crucial. That's the history of the oil industry. But it ends before an important war, so his conclusions, I mean, his last chapter is not that accurate, because he did not foresee that war. So then the Quest corrects that and comes into these modern times. But I'd say start with the Prize.
All right, thank you. What is your main weakness?
I say if I know what I'm talking about, I will say it. And that has been an advantage and a disadvantage. Some people will not want a person who will be assertive and say things. but I've done it, and it has helped. I think it has helped my career a lot. But as long as you, again, maintain your reputation, it's okay. And I'm not afraid of taking challenges, and it has not or making a move. And it has been once in my career that I made a move and it was not a good fit, and I had to move again. And it's not easy, but it happens. Not everything is a good fit, and it happens. But I chose to take a risk.
All right, that was a good answer. All right, any suggestions to keep people motivated? How would you recommend motivation, whether it's yourself or a team, right? Because you have teams now.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the type of team that you have. I think I'm one of the worst persons to be managed. I want to be valued. I need, if I feel valued, I'm much more motivated, of course. But I need certain good degree of freedom to do work and to explore. I have a lot of curiosity. But one thing that I know, for example, is researchers. I've been a researcher for a long time in my life, and most researchers, especially the best ones, you don't tell them what to do. You motivate them to want to solve your problem. So first you have to motivate them to be interested in the problem that you need them to solve. And then you need to empower them. That's the freedom part. You need to let them come up with how they want to solve it, how they want to approach it, because each one of them will have a completely different skill set. If I had been forced by Hitler Hofstede in that internship with Sato to work on Bayesian theory, I probably would not have been that successful in that internship, because that was not in my skill set. I could have done it perhaps, but it would have taken much longer to understand, etc. So it's about motivating people to do what is important. But as I said, it varies a lot. It's always, I think, about one thing that I think is very general. I'm sorry, I'm just not talking properly. But one thing that is more general, and it has been successful for me, is to always give credit to the people. So if you are the manager, if you are the team leader, if you are the colleague, and you are presenting something that somebody else did or said, just mention it. They will know it. They will hear that. It helps them to grow their career. It helps you, keeps you honest. And it doesn't hurt you at all to say that this is something that I learned from this person, or this is something that this person contributed to. So I think that helps a lot. It's about finding the motivation for your team, finding a way to motivate them to do the work that matters.
All right, thank you. Looks like we have a comment. Thank you for your very good presentation. I particularly appreciated the emphasis on personal relationships, maintaining good relationships, networking, and also emphasizing expanding our education to aspects beyond our technical training. So I think that's important. Everyone needs some sort of release, right?
Yeah.
From demanding work, yeah. All right. Hello from Mexico City. How can we start expanding our network? What would you recommend?
Oh, from Mexico City. I think the first thing is perhaps you're already connected to the CG Latin America. That's the first step. Don't be afraid of reach out and write an email. I have started relationships as network in a sense in the industry with a lot of people by writing an email and asking a question about their paper, an honest question, or asking them if they have a copy of this particular paper that was written in the 60s and you cannot find it anywhere else. Reach out, and that helps people. As I said, here you have an industry that is relatively still young compared to science industry, and people are approachable. Approach them.
All right, thank you. Do you have any tips on how to cope with challenges that we as geophysicists encounter since the oil industry is now plummeting for quite some time?
Yeah, this is tough, right? Because I cannot just encourage everyone to continue and work in the oil industry. It's challenging times, challenging futures, lots of changes. I think you need to decide if this is really your passion. If this is your passion, if this is what you want to do, then continue and find your path. But be flexible as well. Be willing to, if you don't find a job, be willing to take a job in a different industry where your path is not going to be so far away. I mean, there's other areas in geophysics that are interesting, that need people, and there are other areas in applied physics in general that would need people. So that's an option. Another option is, of course, to expand your skill set, as we have discussed before, and try to be strategic about it. So if you are into seismic processing, for example, or research towards processing, definitely learn more computing. You will find a job easier in another industry, and you will get skill sets that will help you in this industry.
Right, thank you. As the workforce has become more competitive, and I think to some degree you've already answered this question, what qualification or skill set is the industry looking for as geophysicists nowadays, especially for fresh graduates?
Yeah, well, I have said a lot about it, but you know, the one trend that has been a trend for so many years since I was starting probably before is integration and remove the silos, right? That's why I talked a lot about curiosity. Be willing to take a side step, be curious, read the book, talk to the person that is doing something different, attend a conference, volunteer to a workshop. Is because one of the big challenges with an industry that is well established, I mean, some of these companies have 100 years, more than 100 years, is also silos. There's heavy silos. So being able to communicate across silos, there's some even different languages. It's important. But I would say, I mean, if you're a student, first thing is really learn what you're studying. Second thing is expand it and start connecting. But first, really learn what you're trying to study and to get your degree on.
Okay, thank you. I've just graduated with my bachelor's degree in geophysical engineering and thinking about doing a master's. What are your opinions on going straight to master's degree rather than having work experience first before pursuing the degree?
Well, I did that. Well, I actually did work a couple of months, but that doesn't really count. In between my engineering, my master's, and my PhD, I just went like, so by 28, I finished with the whole thing. And for me, that was the way to go. That was how it worked well for me. But as I said, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted, where I wanted to focus on. I was still finding it, and I found it when I met Arthur Wegman and started my PhD. The practical part came with internships for me, and I value that so much. So that's something you can do. I mean, if you want to just go straight and study, do it, but make sure to pursue an internship as soon as you can. In these low times, in terms of money, I might even pursue you to say that if you can, get an internship, even if it's not paid, if you are serious about this industry. Because by the time that you graduate, perhaps things are much better, and you having that experience will make a difference in your CV.
All right, thank you. I think this will be our last question. We're running a tad bit long. Thank you from Mexico City. Is there any LinkedIn page where we can find you for any doubts or I guess or questions? I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Just write my name. I mean, if you write the name the way it's written for the invitation of this, like Adriana Citlali Ramirez, you'll find me directly. If you miss the Citlali, which is not such a common first name, and then you will probably find a million Adriana Ramirez.
That's true. All right, or I guess you can always email me at SEG. So
Yeah, I think also in SCG you probably can find me. I'm not sure. I think you can, right? There's a directory.
I believe so. Yeah, that's true. And so I guess with that, we're going to close the question and answer session. And thank you, Dr. Adriana Ramirez. Thank all of you for attending the SEG Latin America Regional Advisory Committee's webinar as part of our webinar series, My Path to a Career in Geophysics. Please look for our social media posts to register for more of our interesting talks. Thank you again for attending today. And thank you, Adriana, for a very interesting presentation. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.